Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about the Brooklyn Nets. As I'm recording this earlier today, they had an inter-city matchup against the New York Knicks, who have been pretty decimated by injury throughout this season. This game was no different. No Julius Randle, no OG Anunoby, no Mitchell Robinson. Well, the Nets had basically everybody playing but Ben Simmons. Mikal Bridges was there, Cam Johnson, Cam Thomas, Nick Claxton, Dennis Schroeder, Durant Finney-Smith, Lonnie Walker, Dennis Smith Jr., these guys and more were playing. It was their typical rotation out there. But despite that, and the Knicks facing a billion different injuries, the Nets still found a way to lose by double digits, scored just 93 points, and now move to a record of 26-45, which has them nearly 20 games under 500 and 5 games out of a play-in spot, which, with the way they're playing right now and how little time there was left in the season, is basically a death sentence and assures that they're going to be spending this season in the lottery. It's been a disastrous season for the franchise, and it's even crazier when you consider where they were just a few years ago. They got both Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving in the same free agency class, and then traded for James Harden not too long after. They had a big three that was seemingly unstoppable, and a lot of people would have told you it was a given that those three guys were going to win at least one title in Brooklyn, if not multiple. Even last year, Kyrie and Kevin Durant were there for half the season, but now that era seems like a decade ago, and the Brooklyn Nets have gone from seemingly a lock to get a championship to a team that's in potentially the worst situation in the entire NBA. They're not the worst team, but when you take a look at their current incompetency and the lack of assets going forward, things are looking really bleak for the franchise. So let's talk about what's going on with them. They came into the season as a team that most people saw as a fringe play-in lottery type of squad. There are some people that believed more in them, saying that they would most likely make the playoffs behind Mikal Bridges as an all-star level player, a potential Ben Simmons resurgence, and seemingly a unit that could give them an elite defense between the play of Mikal, Ben Simmons, Durant Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neal, Nick Claxton down low, who was one of the best defensive bigs in the league last season. It did seem like something they could hang their hat on, and if they got enough offensive production, say they got a jump from Cam Thomas, they could find their way into the playoffs. However, not a lot of those things have worked out. Ben Simmons is currently out for the season with a back injury, only played, I think, 15 games this entire year, and we don't know what the future of his career is going to look like. It's become very clear over the course of the year as well that Mikal Bridges cannot be a number one on a team that wins a lot. There's a conversation to be had about if maybe he can be a number two, but I think it's pretty clear he's more fitted to be that number three like he was over in Phoenix at times than he is to be the number one option like the Nets are trying to push him as. Also, the defense has just not been up to snuff, and the offense has been as bad as people were expecting. And at this point, they're bottom 10 in both categories. The net rating's bad, and this was all clear after like 30 games. 30 games into the season, it became pretty clear that this was a bad team, and in my opinion, one that had to make changes sooner than later. To their credit, I guess, they made a change. They got rid of Jacques Vaughn halfway through February, which was seemingly coming for a little while, but that wasn't the change I felt like they needed to make. To me, it was clear they needed to shake up this roster and make a bunch of trades going into the deadline. I talked about this a lot in a video I made where I basically outlined how the Nets have done a really bad job of building up this roster and how it really wasn't going anywhere, but that was before the deadline, and I said they could still salvage this really bad season. All they had to do was make trades, go ahead and blow it up, and stop wasting everybody's time with this failed experiment. Obviously, they didn't do this because the only deals they went ahead and made involved swapping Dennis Schroeder for Spencer Dinwiddie and also trading Royce O'Neal over to the Suns and getting back Keita Bates-Diop and Jordan Goodwin in return. Those aren't exactly the deals I had in mind, especially because going into the deadline, there are a lot of rumors surrounding them in particular. There weren't a lot of stars available on the market. It didn't seem like it was going to be this all-star blockbuster type deadline, but I felt like it could be a big one for role player trades, contenders adding that final piece for a playoff run, and the Nets had a ton of guys that fit this mold. Durant Finney-Smith as a 3-and-D wing, Cam Johnson in a similar mold as well, Mikal Bridges, the ideal complementary piece to any team with stars looking to add that final guy, Nick Claxton as a high-level defensive big that's still plenty young, Lonnie Walker as a really cheap bench option, maybe even Dennis Smith Jr., Spencer Dinwiddie. There were a lot of guys that seemed like they had some type of value, and if they traded all those players, they probably could have gotten like 7, 8 first-round picks in total, plus some second-round picks. Of course, you're going to get players in return too. Like, they could have had an unbelievable haul of assets at the deadline if they went ahead and made those moves. Instead, they decided to do nothing and just ride it out with this middle-of-the-pack roster that's going nowhere fast. The longer they go without trading any of these pieces, the more their value is going to continue to decline and drop, and I feel like it has already reached that point. A great example of this is last year when the Nets received Mikal Bridges in the Kevin Durant trade. There was a report that the Memphis Grizzlies, and this has been verified since then, offered 4 first-round picks to the Nets to get Mikal Bridges. That's a crazy deal to say no to, because obviously they still have him, and if they'd accepted that deal, assuming the pick wasn't heavily protected or anything, the Nets right now might have a lottery pick from the Grizzlies this season. They already could have gotten a young piece out of that trade, plus 3 more first-round picks down the pipeline. And that was prior to him having that ridiculous stretch with the Nets to end last season, where some people thought he could be an all-star coming into this year. I'm sure his value was ridiculous in the offseason, but they again held on to him, and now they held on to him to the deadline, and he's just not had a great year. I think his value has probably dropped drastically from where it was about a year ago. Cam Johnson, I think his value has probably also dropped now on a bigger contract. Dorian Finney-Smith, same thing, especially with him going into his 30s, and next year could potentially be the last year of his contract. Does have a player option afterwards, so we'll have to wait and see. You've also got like Nick Claxton, who's expiring and is going to be an unrestricted free agent this summer, so if they don't end up bringing him back, that's a massively missed opportunity to capitalize on his potential trade value. Maybe they do just retain him, but if they don't, that's a huge misplay on their part. Same thing for Lonnie Walker, who's a really good bench option that's currently on a 1-year minimum contract. I think he's going to walk for a bigger bag, so instead of trading him, you held on to him when it doesn't feel like he's going to be back. It just feels like they continue to squander the trade value of everybody on this roster left and right, whether it's a star-level player or a role player. They just refuse to go ahead and make the necessary moves because they've got this delusional hope that they can build a contender out of this group, especially building around Mikal Bridges and Cam Thomas, when it's not going to happen. A report came out over the past few days that the Nets still believe they can lure a big-name star over to Brooklyn like they did with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving a few years ago. However, if you ask me, I think their chance to get stars has come and went. Why would a star choose Brooklyn over, say, New York, for example, who are in an amazing spot at the moment, especially because the Kyrie Kevin Durant era didn't go anywhere. They brought in 2 stars and even traded for James Harden, and it fell apart almost immediately. And it's not all their fault that it fell apart. There was a global pandemic that contributed and a bunch of injuries, but there was a lot of stress between the stars in the front office that I think is going to turn any star away from going to Brooklyn anytime soon. There's just so many options that are better out there, especially because the Nets don't have a lot of picks or assets going forward into the future to build a team around the star that would come there in the first place. And that's the biggest thing for the Nets. Not only is there no star coming to save them, they're letting players' trade value dwindle by the minute. They don't even have their picks. They don't have control of a single first-round pick of their own until 2028, which is 4 years away. This is a result of the James Harden trade where they gave up all their picks unprotected as well as pick swaps. Even though they suck right now and they would have the 8th best lottery odds, they're sending whatever pick they get this year over to the Houston Rockets like they're going to be doing for a while. But maybe the worst part of that whole situation, because I don't blame them for making the James Harden trade. I think they would do it again if they had the chance. But they dug the hole even deeper this past February at the deadline when, according to Shams, the Rockets were willing to give Brooklyn Jalen Green as well as some of their first-round picks back in exchange for Mikal Bridges. To me, that is an absolute no-brainer, call the league office immediately type of trade. You not only get a really interesting young player with a bunch of potential in Jalen Green, but you get partially bailed out of your awful pick situation. Even if you just got this year's first and next year's one in addition to Jalen Green, I would have pulled the trigger. 2 very valuable first-round picks and a great young player for Mikal Bridges, whose value is dwindling. That should have been an immediate yes, but instead, they didn't even entertain the offer. There was not an iota of interest from the Brooklyn Nets end, which is franchise malpractice. Their only hope for getting more young talent anytime soon is through the picks they accrued by trading away the big 3. They have Phoenix's pick unprotected next year, Philly's pick protected 1 through 8 in 2027, a Phoenix pick in 2027 as well as 2029, a Dallas pick in 2029, as well as some swaps thrown around there with Phoenix. I think there's one from Philadelphia as well. So they do have draft capital from those teams, and if an ideal situation occurs for them, those picks could be valuable. Like say Embiid leaves Philly at some point before 2027, Book and KD could be out of Phoenix by 2027, 2029, Luka could leave Dallas also before 2029, so there is some intrigue there. A lot can change in the NBA over the next 4 to 6 years. But unless Phoenix falls apart next season and that 2025 pick is huge for them, there's nothing of value coming anytime soon for at least the next 3 years, because that Philadelphia pick, the first one from them, doesn't come until that 2027 season, which is still a little ways away. And that's assuming that these picks do end up good, because all those stars I talked about could very well just still be with their franchises in the future. There are guys that seemingly are loyal, like Luka and Joel Embiid, who I think are going to have years of great play still under their belt. Maxi's still over there in Philly too, so there's no guarantee these picks are anything good. You know what would have been guaranteed is if you had your own picks, and you could have seemingly, if you just agreed to that trade with the Rockets back in February, or at the very least at this deadline, you could have given yourself more current shots at the draft. Like, say you trade away some of these players and got picks for this year or next season, at least get some type of assets, recoup them in some way. But no, they stood pat for literally no reason. Instead of doing anything to get them out of this terrible position, they just remained as they were, and now they continue to be a bottom-feeding team with a bleak future and no real path to competing anytime soon. The teams that are worse than them in the NBA right now, at least like the Pistons, the Hornets, you talk about the Washington Wizards, at least they're going through rebuilds and they have young talent, they're going to have top picks. The Brooklyn Nets don't have any of that. The only young guy they have that feels like he has real star potential at the moment is Cam Thomas. I don't think he's going to become an all-star, though. I think he's going to be like a high-level microwave scorer that can give you a bunch of points off the bench or come in and be a spark plug in the starting lineup. But I don't see him as a future all-star level guy. And even if he does become that guy, he's not going to be enough to elevate you to a title team anytime soon. Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton, if he stays, Dorian Finney-Smith, like those guys aren't going to take you anywhere, and I don't think that star that they need is coming. I just don't believe stars are going to look at Brooklyn as they currently are and say, hey, that's a spot that I want to be in. Some of these circumstances they're in aren't their fault, but a majority of it is, because they've been offered bailouts, been given opportunities to land a bunch of draft capital, just do something, anything, and they just continue to decline. It's insane to me how much they've screwed themselves over the course of like just a year. I feel so bad for Nets fans because I don't know when this team is going to be good, like any time soon. Maybe the Phoenix and Philly picks can save them by the end of the 2020s, but to me it feels like they're entering another really rough period, very similar to when they traded for Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce with Boston. They gave up all these draft picks, and they elevated that team to a really high level. I could see Houston benefiting in the same way because the draft picks they have coming up from Brooklyn feel like they're guaranteed to be hits. This first one's already going to be top 10 at the very least. Like, that's a pick that at the 8th odds could very well jump up to a top 5-4 pick, and hey, maybe the Brooklyn Nets could have had it back, but they decided to say no. They just have done nothing to help themselves. They've done themselves no favors and are potentially in the worst position in the entire NBA at the moment. But yeah, I think that's all I've got for this rant about the Brooklyn Nets. Again, Nets fans, I'm really sorry. I hope they can figure something out soon, but I just don't see a path at the moment. Let me know what you think the Brooklyn Nets should do going forward. Do you think they should have made the trades that I talked about earlier in this video? Or do you somehow believe they should stay pat and wait for a star? Do you think a star will come at any point soon? Would love to hear your input on this one. As always, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, sit back.